This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Know Your Right, Share Your Story webinar. We're going to kick off a discussion on how to improve workplace accommodations for pregnant and nursing moms and parents in Georgia. So I'm here with Cameron at A Better Balance. We're going to take a minute and introduce ourselves, and then we're going to jump right into some educational material as well as some important statistics and really work through some of the data on why this is such a pressing issue in our state. So my name is Madison Scott. I'm the Policy and Research Manager at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition of Georgia, and I'm really excited to be here today. Cameron, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Madison, and thanks everybody for joining us today for this great discussion. My name is Cameron Dawson. I'm a staff attorney at A Better Balance's Southern Office, and I'm based here in Nashville, Tennessee.
So I will go ahead and start by telling you all a little bit about our organization at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. We are a nonprofit organization. Our main goal is to serve as one of the strongest nationwide voices and improve healthcare and health outcomes for Georgia's mothers, birthers, and babies. So that's across the perinatal kind of section. My main role is going to be to work on advocacy specifically, as well as the research to inform that advocacy. So really focused on our advocacy agenda, but we are also kind of a hub for education and resources in the state as well. And I'll let Cameron go ahead and tell you all a little bit about A Better Balance.
Sure, and A Better Balance is a legal advocacy organization, and we have a Southern office, like I mentioned earlier, that's based here in Nashville, Tennessee. And our main mission is to use the power of the law to advance justice for workers so that they can care for themselves and their loved ones without risking their economic security, because we believe at A Better Balance that workers should know their rights and they should be able to use the law so that they can care for themselves when they're experiencing a serious medical condition, or they may be pregnant and requesting accommodations, and they shouldn't have to fear losing their job or a paycheck, simply for taking care of their health. And you can see here, we do work on a number of issues, including pregnancy discrimination and lactation discrimination and accommodations work, as well as paid family and medical leave, and leading issues both on the federal and the state and local level on all of these priorities here. And along with our advocacy work that I work with, we also have a free and confidential legal helpline that does give workers information on their rights, whether it be for lactation needs, or if they're currently pregnant and have questions about maternity leave or accommodations, they can call our helpline at 1-833-NEED-ABB for support. And before we get into the Know Your Rights part, I did want to show just a couple of reasons why we're having this conversation and some real life examples of how workers in the entertainment industry are being penalized while being pregnant. And so I wanted to highlight Jade Anuka. She's an English actress known for her various stage roles and appearances in His Dark Matters on BBC One. And actually, she told her experience while pregnant of facing discrimination from her job. And she said, "It felt as if I had been cast aside as a pregnant person as a general rule, rather than the specifics of my situation being taken into account. I was recently offered a TV role unlike any that she'd ever been given before, and she was thrilled. It was the perfect gig to get before the baby arrived. The fee would be a welcome boost, given that I'd be unable to work for a while and would have to take on all the extra costs a little one brings. My agent said we should inform them that I was pregnant, which I was nervous about, but we agreed that it would be the right thing to do." And like many workers, Jade in fact told the studio that she was pregnant after securing this marvelous role, but the very next day she received an email from production with lines quoted from their insurer saying that the premium for a pregnant artist would be so high that the company could simply not cover it, and therefore she was dropped from the job. And this is just one example of what pregnant actresses are experiencing, and also pregnant workers throughout the entertainment industry are experiencing. And so as we have this conversation today about how workplace accommodations are important to the entertainment industry in Georgia, we just wanted to highlight this one celebrity case. And on the next slide, I'll show you another situation that came from a real life case example. So we have Tylo v. Spelling Entertainment Group, and some of you may have heard of this case before. It's coming out of California. And if you've ever watched The Bold and the Beautiful or a soap opera with your family, you know of Hunter Tylo. And so She was set to star in Melrose Place in 1996, the first initial reboot, not the reboot that we know in the 2000s, but upon announcing her pregnancy to the show's producers, Tylo's contract was actually terminated. And they tried to cite a material change clause within the document, saying that because of her pregnancy, she was no longer suitable for the role, and her role was recast, even though her pregnancy could have been camouflaged, either with camera angles or even a body double, and she could have still held her position as that lead actress. And Tylo also noted in her complaint that there were negative statements from the producers about her pregnancy. And in fact, it later came out that the jury found that the spelling executives had discriminated against Tylo by firing her. They treated her negatively based on her pregnancy. And that is, simply against the law. And so, even though you may not be an actress, you may be a producer, or you may be a production assistant on hand, we do want you to know that there are laws protecting pregnant workers, but there are gaps in those laws and a need for advocacy to really make sure that every pregnant worker, no matter where they live or no matter where they work, is protected. And so the main laws that do currently cover pregnant workers right now, and this applies to any industry as long as you have 15 or more employees at your job. And this is the Pregnancy Discrimination Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act that make up the current law and policy landscape on workplace pregnancy accommodations. And so under the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, in order to receive accommodations, pregnant and breastfeeding workers must show that they are treated the same as those who are not affected by pregnancy, but similar in their ability or their inability to work. And so this is a very confusing standard because it doesn't explicitly give pregnant workers and breastfeeding workers the right to receive and request an accommodation, but makes it so you have to compare yourself to other employees. And if you are new on the job, if you're not sure of how other people are being treated, this is a very high burden for a worker to face. And because this places such a unique burden on pregnant workers that have to be able to share with someone else in their workplace who's being accommodated, it really does impact their health and their financial well-being negatively if they're not able to find that comparator. And so we do push for stronger laws that make sure that workers don't need to compare themselves to other workers in order to receive an accommodation, but they can request and receive those accommodations without that comparator. The second law that is in place right now currently is another federal law called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I want to make sure, that everyone is clear with this, that pregnancy itself is not a disability under federal law. And so if you are experiencing a healthy pregnancy, but simply need a minor accommodation, you are not covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act to request and receive an accommodation. But if you do have complications that arise, the Americans with Disabilities Act may be able to cover you, but there still is an unclear standard on whether or not the ADA covers, or if the courts are willing to extend the ADA to cover so many high-risk pregnancies or pregnant people who are experiencing serious complications. Some courts have found that gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, or high blood pressure may be considered a disability under the law, but it is still, a very high burden for workers to prove and even go to the courts to have this determination be found. And we're really just seeing from many workers that they are just simply trying to ask for a minor accommodation before those health complications arise. And they're trying to have these individual conversations with their job in order to keep their paycheck, but also to stay healthy. And so that is why, we do believe that, and we currently advocate for one piece of legislation to fill in these gaps. And you'll see that on the next slide. This law is called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And so this law would provide reasonable accommodations to workers who are pregnant and breastfeeding and have a limitation related to their pregnancy or childbirth, or even a related medical condition, including lactation, unless it would cause an undue hardship on the employer. And that undue hardship standard is the same standard that is used in the Americans with Disabilities Act. But because pregnancy itself is not a disability, many workers are not covered by that law. So we're using the same standard that many employers are used to, they are comfortable with, but we're also allowing pregnant workers and postpartum workers to communicate clearly with their employers and advocate for themselves and their health and their well-being. And so, for example, some accommodations might include being able to have access to a chair or a stool to sit on, using extra bathroom breaks if they need to take a break or have a rest break, having access to frequent rest breaks, help with manual lifting if they have a weightlifting restriction over 20 pounds or 30 pounds because they're pregnant and they're not able to lift that much, as well as having remote work or PPE, protective gear, and other types of accommodations to ensure that the worker can continue to work safely and maintain a healthy pregnancy. And so we really do believe at A Better Balance and Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Georgia that, you know, every pregnant worker deserves their right to request and receive accommodations no matter where they live. And you can see here on the map that currently 30 states have already enacted these stronger protections for their workers. And, you know, we really believe that this has created clarity in the law for employers and employees, but also help to advance positive health outcomes for mothers and babies because they're able to talk to their employer and receive those accommodations in a timely fashion. And as you can see, you know, Georgia still needs to provide this law and has actually introduced legislation last year to called the Working for Two Act. And so we're still advocating on both the state and the federal level for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act to protect all pregnant and postpartum workers. And I'll just turn it over to Madison, who's going to say a little bit more about the health case for why we need legislation like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act.
Yeah, and that Georgia state law has been part of our policy agenda and will continue to be part of our policy agenda going forward in 2023 during the legislative session. And I'd love to kind of walk through some of the data on why this is important. So since 2017, maternal mortality has really been declining worldwide. According to the World Health Organization, however, the US is one of the only 2 countries that has reported a significant increase in its maternal mortality ratio since 2000. So while US maternal deaths have actually leveled out over recent years, the ratio is still extremely high compared to other countries, and there are still significant racial disparities that remain on this data point as well. And so regrettably, the trend is alarmingly reflected in Georgia. And since 2014, the Maternal Mortality Review Committee has been working pretty diligently to review incidents of maternal mortality and help to make recommendations for strategies that will help improve these maternal health outcomes. So I can share some of the more recent data trends that have been observed by the committee, just so I can show you some kind of related pieces of information. I'll start with defining some of these things. So pregnancy-related deaths. You can see here that number, it's a death during pregnancy or within 1 year of the end of pregnancy. And that's something that stems from a pregnancy complication, a chain of events initiated by pregnancy, or an aggravation of an unrelated condition by the physiological effects of pregnancy. And so an example of that can be eclampsia. You can see that the pregnancy-related deaths is a little bit lower than the pregnancy-associated deaths, pretty significantly, and that's 25.1 deaths per 100,000. So the pregnancy-associated deaths, but not related, is the death of a woman during pregnancy or within 1 year of the end of pregnancy from a cause that is not related to the pregnancy. So an example of that cause of death would be like a car crash, but a car crash of a pregnant person. So now that we kind of understand those 2 numbers, we can dive a little bit more into the more recent findings. Again, that it's roughly about 25 deaths per 100,000 since the case review began by the MMRC in 2012. And if you look here, the most common deaths pregnancy associated is going to be the motorcycle vehicle incident, but very close to that is drug toxicity deaths. And so There's been a significant increase in pregnancy-associated ratio from 2015 to 2017, though that data is a little bit old. New numbers are going to be released shortly, and we're going to be presenting our State of the State report in October, which will help break down kind of how the state has gone since COVID. And these numbers, though they have shifted somewhat, the trends are still somewhat the same. So when we start to account for race and residency, the disparities are even more concerning. Black women in Georgia are 2.5 times as likely to die from childbirth than white women. Individuals in rural parts of our state also observe a slightly higher rate of maternal mortality compared to those living in urban areas. So the main concerning point that I see here, the number that really stands out to me, is that 87% of these deaths were preventable. And so this means that this is a solvable problem, and parental paid leave is a really large part of solving that problem. It leads to an increase in kind of maternal health across the board, whether that's physical or mental, a decrease in potential for I'm losing the word, but for postpartum deaths, as well as for postpartum depression. And you can see here on the right of this slide that over 81% of those associated deaths actually happen in the postpartum period. So this time period that these paid leave laws would potentially be going into account, or these pregnant workers' accommodations are going into account, is going to impact 81% of these deaths in that time period specifically. So if you come over and shift a little bit to access to care barriers, you can see that 17% of women, despite geography, have an inadequate access to prenatal care. In addition, since 1994, there's been 37 labor and delivery unit closures across our state. And so these are particularly happening in rural counties. And that is also, in those areas, 2/3 of the births happen outside of the home county. And so you can see this heat map here really breaks down where those closures are and where the concentration of labor and delivery services is. So it's really just, it's not surprising that those rural numbers are so much different than the urban numbers as well, because given these realities, rural birth givers in Georgia seem to have a significantly higher maternal mortality rate than those living in urban areas, and their access to care is lower as well. So this impacts infants as well. When we really start to look at the infant data, our concerns can lie with maternal health, but we have equal concerns as Georgia's infant mortality rate continues to be ranked among the highest in the nation. So you can see here that the leading cause of death in the state is premature birth defects and SIDS. So leaning in a little bit on this preterm birth number, the CDC's identified several risk factors for preterm birth. So that's low income, prior preterm birth, certain chronic conditions, and stress. A lot of that can be tied into some of the mental state and the mental health of the mother, as well as the family unit, which is something that's directly related to some of these pregnant worker accommodation issues. So just to give a little bit more data context, 1 in 10 babies are born prematurely, making roughly about 9.5% of the births in the US. So in comparison, 11.4% of Georgia's babies are born prematurely. So our March of Dimes partners have given Georgia a D- grade in its 2021 preterm birth report card. So we had previously been graded an F, but we've taken some small steps to get up to a D-. Something that's really important about this number is that it's not, when you zoom in county-wise, it's not always the same. So there are perinatal regions, counties across the state where that grade has stayed in an F, or the state of maternal health has worsened. And so across the board, there isn't improvement. Though there is improvement in small areas that have led to that preterm birth grade increasing, there's still a lot of need and potential worsening of conditions for those in our state in certain areas. And so again, we continue to see that slightly more premature births happen in rural counties versus those non-rural counties. So all of that goes to kind of come into that same idea that our rural counties are really struggling with access, and leads more into the need for some of these protections. And so I am pleased to share that Georgia's breastfeeding frequency of initiation is slightly higher than the national average, with 84% of mothers breastfeeding their infants. That's something that is very focused in that postpartum period and can directly be related to the ability to breastfeed during work. And so that's something that we really want to help keep maintain. Benefits of breastfeeding for mothers include lower risk of breast cancer, heart disease, and other ailments. And it also leads to protecting babies from illnesses like ear, skin, and respiratory infections, diarrhea, vomiting, as well as longer-term conditions like obesity, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and asthma. So that really, all of this data breaks down and really grounds us in our why this protection, why this is so important for our advocacy agenda, for our policy agenda on the state and federal level, and why you can see that our mothers, our families, our parents, and our babies are struggling in our state, so that we can really put some context around this legal framework. And that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Cameron to tell us a little bit about how to get more involved with both of our organizations and what your next steps can be advocacy-wise as well.
Thanks, Madison. And I think it's so important to see why are we doing this work and what are the statistics and data that we can really improve in our state. And as someone that, is involved in advocacy, it's never too late to be involved. And so if you are just having questions about your rights or how to go about having these conversations with your employer while you're working in the entertainment industry, please feel free to give our helpline a call. It is free and you can talk with an attorney confidentially, so we don't share it with your employer or coworkers, but you can reach us at 1-833-NEED-ABB if you have questions about what are your rights to paid sick time in the workplace, or if you have prenatal doctor's appointments, how do you go about making sure that your job is protected while you take that time off, and even, after birth, if you have questions about what are your rights to pumping in the workplace. Those are some of the questions we can help you with. And for more information, you can also visit our website at abetterbalance.org/state/Georgia. And we have some helpful fact sheets and one-pagers as well on some of the state laws that provide breastfeeding rights in Georgia, as well as the federal laws that protect many workers.
Yeah, and I've listed here our resource house hub at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies of Georgia. We've partnered with the Department of Health to connect you with kind of some vital resources and support that you may need if you find yourself pregnant or in need of pregnancy resources. So you're also welcome to give our call line a call in and speak with our information and referral specialists. The number is listed here as well. And then for getting involved in our general advocacy efforts, our 2023 legislative priorities are going to be released shortly, and we're going to be doing some serious work in the Georgia Capitol, looking at some of these pregnancy accommodation laws, paid parental leave, and all of our other kind of related policy agendas. And so we would love for you to get involved in that. Feel free to visit our advocacy education and resources on our website to see what we have coming up.
And thanks, Madison, for sharing those helpful resources. And I do want to say thank you so much for attending our webinar today. And I know it seems like a lot of information, but how do you get involved? What do you do next? And so there are many ways that you can participate in this advocacy work. It's never too late. And we actually have 2 and 3 main asks for you today. So, first is share your story. We're going to share a link to a form that asks you questions about your experience with pregnancy accommodations in the workplace. Share it with your friends, share it with folks that have had, who have either been pregnant or are currently taking care of their baby and are nursing their baby while working, and see if they can complete that survey to share their story, because your voice deserves to be heard. And we do need to figure out policy solutions to make Georgia a better place for working families. And second thing I will say is take 2 minutes, just now, bring out your phone, your cell phone or your computer, and call your legislator. Talk to them about how important these issues are to you. And you can actually call Senator Warnock's office at 202-224-3643 and take 2 minutes just to say, thank you for supporting the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act or the PWFA, and please continue to urge Senator Schumer to bring the PWFA to a floor vote. And that's all you have to do. We are really close to the finish line with this piece of legislation on the federal level. It has already passed the House and is currently awaiting a floor vote in the Senate. And that is the final step, of course, before going to Biden's desk for signage. And so we really are urging our senators and legislators to push this bill to a floor vote. And we need your help to do that. So take the next 2 minutes to call your senator. And if you're able to do those two things, the last thing we ask is just to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You could see our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter pages here at HMHBGA, and also A Better Balance. And you can keep up to date on our new updates, whether that is paid parental leave, pregnancy accommodations, as well as childcare access and expanding access to prenatal care for workers in Georgia. And so please feel free to share this information with those that you know, and thanks so much for attending. We really do appreciate your time and space here.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I'll go ahead and say that if there's any further questions or you want to get further involved, always don't hesitate to reach out to Cameron or myself as well through our organizations, and we can get you more involved in some of these resources. But I will go ahead and end us there. Thank you so much.